The biting Seattle wind whipped through the alley, carrying with it the scent of rain and despair. Graham Mitchell, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent industries to his will, found himself kneeling beside a cardboard box, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the grimy surroundings. Inside, curled into a tight ball against the cold, was a little girl. Her name was Maddie, and the sight of her sleeping so soundly amidst such desolation was a punch to Graham's gut, a stark reminder of everything he had lost. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was the annual Mitchell Foundation Gala, a glittering affair where Seattle's elite would pat themselves on the back for their philanthropy. Graham should have been there, smiling for the cameras, making polite conversation, and pretending that the gaping hole in his heart didn't exist. Tonight also marked 5 years since the accident. 5 years since a drunk driver had stolen his wife, Emily, and their daughter, Lily, from him. But the thought of the gala, of the forced smiles and empty platitudes, had been unbearable. So, he'd done what he often did on this night. He'd driven, aimlessly, drawn to the city's underbelly, as if seeking penance for a grief he couldn't outrun. He traded his chauffeur-driven limousine for his old, beat-up Porsche and ventured into the parts of Seattle that tourists never saw. He hadn't planned to end up here, in this forgotten alley behind a closed-down diner. He hadn't planned to find Maddie. Graham gently nudged the box with his foot. "Hey," he said softly, his voice rough with disuse. "Are you okay?" Maddie stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were wide, innocent, and filled with a wariness that no child should possess. She stared at Graham for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she scrambled to her feet, clutching a tattered blanket around her thin frame. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the city's hum. Graham hesitated. "My name is Graham, I saw you sleeping here, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." He cursed at himself for sounding so awkward. He was a master of persuasion in the boardroom, but here, faced with this child's vulnerability, he felt utterly lost. Maddie didn't answer. She just continued to stare at him, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. He could see the suspicion etched on her face, the ingrained distrust of strangers that poverty had forced upon her. "It's okay," Graham said, his voice softening. "I'm not going to hurt you. Are you hungry? Cold?" She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Come on," Graham said, extending a hand. "Let's get you something to eat, somewhere warm." Maddie hesitated for another moment, then slowly reached out and took his hand. Her hand was small and cold in his, her grip surprisingly strong. As he helped her out of the box, he noticed a figure huddled in the shadows nearby. "Mommy." Maddie called out, her voice laced with concern. A woman emerged from the darkness. She was young, but her face was etched with exhaustion and worry. Her clothes were worn and dirty, but there was a spark of defiance in her eyes. This must be Isabel, Maddie's mother. "Maddie, I told you not to talk to strangers," Isabel said, her voice sharp. She glared at Graham, her eyes filled with suspicion. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is Graham Mitchell," he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I just found your daughter sleeping in the alley, and I wanted to help. I can offer you both a warm place to stay, something to eat." Isabel's eyes narrowed. "Why would you do that? What's the catch?" Graham sighed. He knew how this looked. A wealthy man offering help to a homeless woman and her child. It was the stuff of fairy tales, the kind that rarely came true. And yet, here he was doing just that. "There is no catch," he said, his voice sincere. I want to help. I have a guest house that's empty, and I can't stand the thought of you both spending another night out here in the cold." Isabel studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. Graham met her gaze steadily, willing her to believe him. He wasn't sure why he was doing this, why he was opening himself up to the possibility of being hurt again. Maybe it was the memory of Lily, maybe it was the sheer desperation in Maddie's eyes. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a chance to finally heal the emptiness inside him. I don't know what to say," Isabel said, her voice softening slightly. "I don't want your charity." It's not charity, Graham said. It's an opportunity for both of you to get back on your feet. He paused, then added, and maybe an opportunity for me too. He didn't elaborate, but Isabel seemed to understand. She looked at Maddie, then back at Graham, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. Okay, she said finally. We'll take you up on your offer, but just for one night. Graham smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. One night is all I ask. As he led them towards his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just set something in motion, something that would change all of their lives forever. He glanced back at Maddie, who was clutching his hand tightly, her eyes wide with wonder. He knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be challenges and obstacles ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness that had consumed him for so long. The drive to Graham's estate was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the car's engine. Maddie pressed her face against the window, watching the city lights blur past. Isabel sat beside her, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. As they pulled through the gates of the estate, Maddie gasped. The mansion loomed large and imposing against the night sky, its windows glowing with warm light. The manicured lawns stretched out as far as the eye could see, and a fountain gurgled merrily in the center of the circular driveway. It was a world away from the alley they had just left behind. Wow, Maddie whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. Isabel remained silent, her expression unreadable. She was grateful for Graham's generosity, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't belong here, in this world of wealth and privilege. She knew that their stay here was temporary, that sooner or later they would have to return to the streets. But for tonight, at least, they had a safe place to sleep, a warm meal to eat, and a glimmer of hope to cling to. The problem was, Isabel had a secret, one she had kept hidden from everyone for years, a secret that, if revealed, could shatter the fragile peace they had found. As Graham led them inside the mansion, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. He knew that inviting these strangers into his life was a risk, that it could end in heartbreak and disappointment. But he was willing to take that chance. Because in their eyes, he saw a reflection of his own pain, his own loneliness. And he knew, deep down, that maybe, just maybe, they could heal each other. The grand foyer, with its marble floors and soaring ceilings, echoed with the weight of his past, but tonight it also held the promise of a new beginning, a chance to rewrite his story, and perhaps finally find peace. He glanced at Isabel and Maddie, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, and he knew that their journey had just begun. The guest house was a miniature version of the main mansion, elegant and well-appointed but with a cozy, lived-in feel. As Maddie explored her new surroundings with wide-eyed wonder, Isabel couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. This opulence, this safety, was a world away from the life she had provided for her daughter. "There's a TV," Maddie exclaimed, pointing to a large flat screen hanging on the wall. "And a PlayStation," Graham smiled. "Help yourself," he said. "There are plenty of games to play." Isabel watched Maddie bounce on the plush sofa, her laughter echoing through the room. It had been so long since she had seen her daughter this happy. She turned to Graham, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Graham said. "I'm happy to help." He led them to the kitchen, where a table was set with a simple but delicious meal of pasta and salad. As they ate, Graham learned more about Maddie and Isabel. Maddie was bright and curious, with a mischievous glint in her eyes. She loved to draw and dreamed of becoming an artist. Isabel was quiet and reserved, but Graham sensed a deep strength beneath her fragile exterior. She had worked hard to provide for Maddie, taking on odd jobs and doing whatever it took to keep them afloat. After dinner, Graham showed them to their bedrooms. Maddie's room was decorated in bright, cheerful colors, with a fluffy rug and a collection of stuffed animals. Isabel's room was more subdued, with soft lighting and a comfortable armchair. I hope you'll be comfortable here, Graham said. If you need anything, just let me know. We will, Isabel said. Thank you again. As Graham left the guest house, Isabel sat down on the bed, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too good to be true. She knew that Graham was a good man, but she couldn't help but wonder what his motives were. Why was he being so generous to them? What did he really want? Her thoughts drifted back to the past, to the events that had led her to this point. 10 years ago, she had been a bright, ambitious young woman with dreams of becoming a doctor. She had been studying pre-med at the University of Washington when she met Ethan Mitchell, Graham's younger brother. Ethan was charming and charismatic, with a smile that could melt your heart. He was also wealthy and privileged, the heir to the Mitchell family fortune. Isabel had fallen for him hard, and they had quickly become inseparable. But their relationship had been a whirlwind of passion and drama. Ethan was impulsive and reckless, with a penchant for partying and living life on the edge. Isabel had tried to keep him grounded, but he had always resisted. Then, one night, everything had changed. Isabel had discovered that she was pregnant. She had been terrified, unsure of what to do. She had told Ethan, hoping that he would be happy, that he would want to start a family with her. But Ethan's reaction had been far from what she had expected. He had been angry, accusing her of trying to trap him. He had told her that he wasn't ready to be a father, that he had too much living to do. He had given her money for an abortion and told her to forget about him. Isabel had been heartbroken. She couldn't believe that the man she loved could be so cruel. She had refused to have the abortion. She couldn't bring herself to end the life of her child. She had dropped out of school and moved away, determined to raise her baby on her own. For years, she had struggled to make ends meet, working low-paying jobs and relying on the kindness of strangers. She had never told anyone about Ethan, about the Mitchell family. She had wanted to protect Maddie from the truth, from the pain of knowing that her father had rejected her. But now, fate had brought her face to face with Graham Mitchell, Ethan's brother. And she knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. Meanwhile, across the manicured lawns in the main house, Graham found himself unable to sleep. He sat in his study, surrounded by the trappings of his success, but feeling emptier than ever. He thought about Maddie and Isabel, about the hardships they had faced and the resilience they had shown. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had come into his life for a reason. Maybe, just maybe, they were the key to unlocking the prison of grief he had been living in for the past 5 years. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text message from Richard Harding, his business partner and closest confidant. "Everything okay?" the message read. "You missed the gala. Everyone's asking about you." Graham sighed. He didn't want to talk to Richard, didn't want to explain why he had skipped the gala. But he knew that he couldn't avoid him forever. "I'm fine," he texted back. "Just had something come up." "Anything I can help with?" Richard replied. "No, thanks," Graham wrote. "I've got it covered." He knew that Richard wouldn't let it go that easily. Richard was always looking out for him, always trying to protect his interests. But Graham didn't want Richard to know about Maddie and Isabel. He didn't want anyone to know. He wanted to keep them safe, to shield them from the prying eyes of the world. But he knew that secrets had a way of coming out, especially in his world. And he couldn't shake the feeling that the fragile peace he had found was about to be shattered. The next morning, Maddie woke up early, eager to explore her new surroundings. She ran to Isabel's room and jumped on the bed, waking her up. "Mommy, Mommy, wake up," she exclaimed. "Let's go outside." Isabel groaned and rolled over. "Maddie, it's too early," she mumbled. "Go back to sleep." "But I want to see the garden," Maddie pleaded. "Graham said there's a fountain." Isabel sighed and sat up. She couldn't resist Maddie's enthusiasm. Okay, she said. "Let's go." They got dressed and went outside hand in hand. The garden was even more beautiful than Maddie had imagined. Flowers of every color bloomed in abundance, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of roses. The fountain sparkled in the sunlight, its water cascading down in a shimmering curtain. Maddie ran towards the fountain, her laughter echoing through the garden. Isabel watched her, her heart filled with love and gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. But as she looked around at the manicured lawns and the imposing mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a dream, a temporary escape from the harsh realities of her life. And she knew that sooner or later, she would have to wake up. The past was never far behind. Days turned into weeks, and a comfortable routine settled over the guest house. Maddie blossomed under Graham's care, her laughter filling the once silent halls. She spent hours drawing, her imagination fueled by the beauty of the estate. Graham, in turn, found himself drawn to Maddie's infectious joy, her presence a balm to his wounded soul. He enrolled her in a private school, ensuring she received the best education possible, something Isabel could only have dreamed of providing. Isabel, however, remained wary. While grateful for Graham's generosity, she couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound happiness was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. The biggest secret of all, of course, was Maddie's paternity. The longer she stayed at the Mitchell estate, the more difficult it became to keep the truth hidden. One afternoon, as Maddie was busy with her homework, Isabel found Graham in the library, surrounded by stacks of books. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and approached him. "Graham," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "can I talk to you about something?" Graham looked up, his expression concerned. "Of course, Isabel, what's wrong?" Isabel fidgeted with her hands, her eyes darting around the room. "It's about Maddie," she said, "about her father." Graham's expression changed. He had noticed that Isabel never spoke about Maddie's father. He had assumed that it was a painful subject and he hadn't wanted to pry. But now, it seemed, she was ready to talk. "I understand if this is difficult for you," Graham said, his voice gentle. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." Isabel took a deep breath. "Maddie's father. His name is Ethan Mitchell." Graham stared at her, his face paling. "Ethan?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "My brother?" Isabel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Graham," she said. "I never meant for you to find out this way. I never wanted you to know." Graham stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked over to the window and stared out at the garden, his mind reeling. Ethan, his younger brother, the black sheep of the family, he had always been a source of embarrassment and disappointment. And now, he was the father of the little girl who had brought so much light back into Graham's life. "When did you meet him?" Graham asked, his voice strained. Isabel told him the story of her relationship with Ethan, of their passionate affair and his subsequent rejection when she told him she was pregnant. She told him about her struggles to raise Maddie on her own, about the sacrifices she had made. Graham listened in silence, his heart aching for Isabel and Maddie. He couldn't believe that his own brother could be so cruel, so callous. "Why didn't you tell me?" Graham asked, his voice accusing. "Why did you keep this a secret?" Isabel's tears streamed down her face. "I was afraid," she said, "afraid of what you would think of me, afraid that you would take Maddie away from me." Graham turned and looked at her, his expression softening. "I would never do that, Isabel," he said. "Maddie is like a daughter to me. I would never take her away from you." He walked over to Isabel and took her hands in his. "But why didn't you tell Ethan?" he asked. "Why didn't you tell him that he had a daughter?" Isabel hesitated. "I tried," she said. "I tried to contact him after I had Maddie, but he wouldn't return my calls. He had moved on with his life. He didn't want anything to do with me or Maddie." Graham's anger flared. He couldn't believe that Ethan could be so heartless. He vowed to confront his brother to make him acknowledge his responsibility. Just then, Richard Harding, Graham's business partner, walked into the library. He stopped short when he saw Graham and Isabel holding hands. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice cool. "I didn't realize you were busy." Graham dropped Isabel's hands and turned to Richard, his expression hardening. "What do you want, Richard?" he asked. "I need to talk to you about the Peterson deal," Richard said. "They're threatening to pull out." I'll deal with it later, Graham said. I'm busy right now. Richard's eyes narrowed. He had always been suspicious of Isabel, of her sudden appearance in Graham's life. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was using him, that she was after his money. Isabel, Richard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. It's always a pleasure. I was just telling Graham that some old friends of yours have been asking about you. Apparently, you have quite the history. Isabel paled. She knew what Richard was doing. He was trying to intimidate her to expose her past. Richard, that's enough, Graham said, his voice warning. Richard ignored him. I heard you used to work at a strip club, he said, his eyes fixed on Isabel. Is that true? Isabel's face flushed with shame. It was a long time ago, she said. I did what I had to do to survive. Richard smirked. And what about Maddie's father? He asked. I heard he was a real piece of work, a deadbeat who abandoned you when you got pregnant. Graham stepped forward, his fists clenched. Richard, get out, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Richard held up his hands in mock surrender. All right, he said. I'm just saying, Graham, you need to be careful. You don't know who you're dealing with. These people are not like us. He turned and walked out of the library, leaving Graham and Isabel in stunned silence. I'm so sorry, Graham, Isabel said, her voice choked with tears. I didn't want you to find out about my past. Graham took her in his arms and held her tight. It's okay, Isabel, he said. I don't care about your past. All I care about is you and Maddie. But as he held her, he couldn't shake the feeling that Richard was right. He didn't know who he was dealing with, and he had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. He knew Richard wouldn't stop digging. He'd use whatever he could find to try and separate Graham from Isabel and Maddie, even if it meant exposing secrets that were best left buried. The storm clouds were gathering, and Graham knew they were headed for a reckoning. The tension in the house was palpable. Richard's words hung in the air, poisoning the fragile peace that Graham, Isabel, and Maddie had created. Graham knew he had to confront Richard to put an end to his meddling once and for all. He found Richard in his office, overlooking the city skyline. Richard turned as Graham entered, a smug look on his face. So, Richard said, leaning back in his chair. Did you enjoy my little exposé? You went too far, Richard, Graham said, his voice tight with anger. Isabel's past is none of your business. Oh, but it is my business, Graham, Richard said. I'm your partner, your friend. I have to look out for you, and I don't trust her. She's a gold digger, Graham. She's using you. That's not true, Graham said. Isabel cares about me, and I care about her. Oh, really? Richard said, raising an eyebrow. Does she know about the Mitchell Foundation Gala next week? The one where you're supposed to announce our new partnership with the Children's Hospital. Are you planning on bringing her as your date? Graham hesitated. He hadn't thought about the gala. It was a high-profile event, one that would be attended by the city's elite. He wasn't sure if Isabel would be comfortable in that environment. I haven't decided yet, Graham said. Well, let me give you some advice, Richard said. Don't. Bringing her to that gala would be a disaster. It would ruin your reputation, Graham, and it would jeopardize our deal with the Children's Hospital. I don't care about the deal, Graham said. I care about Isabel. You're being irrational, Graham, Richard said. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. You need to think about what's best for the company, for the foundation. I am thinking about what's best, Graham said, and what's best is for you to stay out of my personal life. He turned and walked out of the office, slamming the door behind him. He knew that Richard wouldn't give up that easily. He would continue to try to undermine his relationship with Isabel, to drive them apart. That evening, Graham decided to take Isabel and Maddie out for dinner. He wanted to show Isabel that he was proud to be with her, that he didn't care about her past. They went to a fancy restaurant overlooking the Puget Sound. Maddie was thrilled, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the elegant surroundings. Isabel, however, seemed uncomfortable. She fidgeted with her silverware and avoided eye contact with the other diners. Are you okay? Graham asked, his voice concerned. I'm fine, Isabel said, forcing a smile. Just a little nervous. There's nothing to be nervous about, Graham said. You look beautiful. Isabel blushed. She was wearing a new dress that Graham had bought for her. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she had ever owned. As they were eating, Graham noticed Richard enter the restaurant. He walked over to their table, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Graham," Richard said, his voice smooth. "Fancy seeing you here." "Richard," Graham said, his voice cold. "What do you want?" "Just wanted to say hello," Richard said. He turned to Isabel, his smile condescending. "Isabel, isn't it? I was just telling some friends about your interesting past." Isabel's face paled. She knew what Richard was doing. He was trying to humiliate her in front of Graham. "Richard, leave her alone," Graham said, his voice warning. Richard ignored him. "I was telling them about your days as a stripper," he said, his eyes fixed on Isabel, "and about how you abandoned Maddie when she was a baby." Maddie gasped, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at Isabel, her expression confused. "Mommy, is that true?" she asked. Isabel's tears streamed down her face. She couldn't believe that Richard would do this, that he would expose her secrets in front of her daughter. "It's not what it sounds like, Maddie," Isabel said, her voice choked with tears. "I can explain." "No, Mommy," Maddie said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to hear it." She stood up and ran out of the restaurant, her sobs echoing through the room. Graham turned to Richard, his face contorted with rage. "You son of a bitch," he said. "I'm going to kill you." He lunged at Richard, his fists flying. The two men wrestled on the floor, their fight drawing the attention of the other diners. Isabel watched in horror, her heart breaking. She had ruined everything. Her past had come back to haunt her, destroying her relationship with Graham and hurting her daughter. Finally, the restaurant staff managed to separate Graham and Richard. Graham was escorted out of the restaurant, his face bruised and bloody. Isabel was left alone at the table, her tears flowing freely. She knew that she couldn't stay at the Mitchell estate any longer. She had to leave to protect Maddie from the fallout of her past. She stood up and walked out of the restaurant, her head held low. As she stepped out into the night, she knew that her life would never be the same. The trust that had been built was now shattered, leaving her and Maddie vulnerable and alone. The secrets she had tried so hard to bury had surfaced, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The only thing left to do was pick up the pieces and try to rebuild, but the scars of this betrayal would run deep. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Graham, reeling from Richard's betrayal and Maddie's heartbreak, retreated into himself, consumed by guilt and anger. He fired Richard, but the damage was done. The scandal made headlines, tarnishing his reputation and jeopardizing the Mitchell Foundation's partnerships. Isabel, meanwhile, had taken Maddie to a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. She felt ashamed and heartbroken, convinced that she had ruined any chance of a stable life for her daughter. Maddie was withdrawn and silent, struggling to understand why the man she had come to love had turned against her mother. One evening, as Isabel was tucking Maddie into bed, Maddie looked up at her, her eyes filled with sadness. "Mommy," she said, "do you think Graham will ever forgive us?" Isabel sighed. "I don't know, honey," she said. "I hope so, but I understand if he doesn't." "I miss him," Maddie said, her voice trembling. "I miss living in the big house. I miss drawing in the garden." Isabel hugged her daughter tightly. "I know, baby," she said. "I miss it too, but we'll be okay. We always are." Unbeknownst to them, Graham had been searching for Isabel and Maddie relentlessly. Despite his anger and hurt, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake, that he had let Richard's words cloud his judgment. He finally tracked them down to the motel. He hesitated for a long moment before knocking on the door, unsure of what to say. Isabel opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw Graham standing there. "Graham," she said, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," Graham said. "I was wrong, Isabel. I shouldn't have listened to Richard. I should have trusted you." Isabel looked at him, her expression wary. "It's too late, Graham," she said. "The damage is done. Maddie doesn't trust me anymore, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again." "Please, Isabel," Graham said. "Just give me a chance to explain, to make things right." He looked past Isabel and saw Maddie standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on him. "Maddie," Graham said, his voice gentle. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Maddie hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Graham knelt down in front of her, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry, Maddie," he said. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just angry and confused, but I want you to know that I care about you very much, and I would never do anything to intentionally hurt you or your mother." Maddie looked at him, her expression softening. "Do you really mean that?" she asked. "I do," Graham said. "I promise." Maddie smiled, a small, tentative smile. "I miss you too, Graham," she said. Graham smiled back, his heart swelling with emotion. He stood up and turned to Isabel. "Please, Isabel," he said, "come back to the estate. Let's start over. Let's be a family." Isabel looked at Maddie, then back at Graham. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine remorse. She knew that it wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges ahead. But she also knew that she loved Graham and that she wanted to be with him. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll come back, but things have to be different this time. No more secrets, no more lies." "I promise," Graham said. "From now on, we'll be honest with each other. We'll trust each other." He reached out and took Isabel's hand, then pulled her close. He wrapped his arms around her and Maddie, holding them tight. As they stood there, embraced in the doorway of the motel room, they knew that they had a long road ahead of them. But they also knew that they were together, and that they could face anything as long as they had each other. Meanwhile, Richard Harding faced the consequences of his actions. The scandal surrounding his attempts to sabotage Graham's relationship with Isabel led to his expulsion from the Mitchell Foundation and a barrage of lawsuits. His reputation ruined, he was ostracized by the city's elite, a pariah in the world he once dominated. Back at the Mitchell estate, life slowly returned to normal. Graham worked tirelessly to repair the damage to his reputation and to restore the Mitchell Foundation's image. He publicly acknowledged his relationship with Isabel and Maddie, embracing them as his family. Maddie thrived in her new environment, her artistic talent blossoming. She enrolled in art classes and began to exhibit her work, earning recognition for her unique perspective. Graham, Isabel, and Maddie found peace and happiness, having overcome their past traumas and betrayals. They had built a strong, loving family based on honesty, trust, and forgiveness. They learned that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that family wasn't always about blood, but about the bonds that tied them together. The wounds of the past had healed, replaced by a sense of hope and the enduring power of compassion. The little girl in the cardboard box had not only found a home, but had also brought light and love back into the life of a man who thought he had lost everything. And in the end, that was the most unreal thing of all.